Okay. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our interview with Stephanie Mertz. Stephanie is a CTO and co-founder of RegTech startup Eisen, and she has over 15 years of experience developing specialized software to help financial institutions modernize legacy systems and streamline complex regulatory and risk processes. Stephanie, thank you for joining us for our Risk Management Show podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. I love this topic.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. So I believe that we will have a very thoughtful conversation with you on the topic of emerging tech like AI for risk management specifically, and maybe leveraging RegTech and partnerships to enable fintech compliance. So Stephanie, could you tell us firstly a short story about yourself, your career path, and what brought you to where you are right now in Eisen, and what is your guys are up to these days?
Certainly. My background is as a software engineer, so I love coming at problems from how they are built, how they work, and really kind of breaking down processes to understand why they are the way that they are. My previous role was as a software engineer at a financial services company called 2 Sigma that was an institutional asset manager. And while I was there, I partnered with a number of teams, one including risk management, to analyze some of our existing processes and build out technology to improve them. So that became one of my favorite dynamics, is to work with subject matter experts to understand why things are the way that they are, and then what could possibly be done better. And after that, my co-founder and I started Eisen, where we've been building out software to automate the escheatment process for banks and financial institutions. So we really focus on the account offboarding process and how to ensure that consumer accounts stay compliant through their whole operating life cycle. Traditionally, a lot of these processes have been done in a very human-centered way. Excel spreadsheets, consultants, industry experts, and it's a very manual process every time this has to happen, which is multiple times throughout a year. So we've been really enjoying thinking about how software can make this a better process, whether that includes AI. It definitely includes a lot of kind of regular standard static rules to be able to see why things are the way that they are. And I think there's a time and a place for various technologies, especially in the RegTech space. So I'm excited to chat about some of my thoughts there.
Absolutely. So we will go more deep in your specific focus on your process for fintech companies for validating dormant account. Is it about, right? Something like this.
Spot on. So larger fintechs and banks.
Okay. So, but let's first discuss a more broader issue at hand about financial industry, because it's kind of considered a very conservative industry. So how do you see how is artificial intelligence transforming the landscape of risk management in the financial industry at this moment?
So I think I'll start with how I think emerging tech always affects such a regulated industry, which I think of it almost like a new hire. When you have a new hire, you don't give them the most critical process that you have as an institution on day one, and for them to handle it on their own with no checks, right? When we have a new hire, we train them, we show them the ropes, we show them how things are being done. Often they have new ways about doing things, and that can be really great, but it's a slow process of understanding what this person is capable of, what some of the risks are, and transferring it to someone new. And I think about emerging technology in a pretty similar way, where we don't necessarily start with the most critical process when we're trying something new. We start with something that we can learn from, that we can build out, to continue the analogy, or set of interview questions or performance review techniques. And I think with AI, we're really in the initial phases with that. How can banks evaluate a technology? How can they understand as they've incorporated it? Is it functioning as they expected? Or do they need to maybe modify some of the process around it?
Mm-hmm. And what are the main advantages you see of AI in risk management? Or are you still early to predict? Of course, we spoke with other guys. They are doing most like credit scoring and other specific processes. And what do you see in your marketplace going on?
We've been seeing the most opportunity is areas where pattern matching to existing patterns is doable and a huge advantage if you have it. So I'll use a very specific example. Let's say transaction monitoring. To do transaction monitoring historically, you might have a set of static rules where you're literally defining out the patterns that you're looking for. If this kind of transaction pattern occurs, flag it. We have seen this pattern before, and we know this is something we should investigate. AI might be able to layer on an additional approach of maybe you can't define the exact pattern, but it can match this pattern to something we know is worth investigating. I think this is relatively safe if you're doing it in addition to what you've done historically. The cost of false positives is relatively low to investigate a transaction, and the cost of false negatives is extremely low if you have an existing process in place that you trust. So I think that's a really good example of the types of areas that we're seeing people test this out a little bit more, is where there's data readily available, there's pattern matching to be done, and there's a human in the loop for being able to verify decisions as opposed to decisions being automatically taken as is.
Fantastic. So how do regulators view the adoption of AI in these specific processes, and what are some potential challenges from a regulatory point of view?
I think the challenge to regulators as well as operators is understanding the quality of decisions and what the verification is being done to understand how things operate in practice. I think we're very familiar with what it's like to have human decision making. We understand it can be flawed. Humans make errors, but also they generally use their best judgment. They have experience. There's a level of trust in the humans that are making those decisions. And when they do make mistakes, we often have other humans around them to catch them. And I think a big concern when it comes to regulators is, how are we developing that same level of trust and safety? How are we able to trust decisions? How are we able to notice when wrong decisions are made? And how are we able to fix that process going forward? We have a very tried and true method when it's humans. And I think there's a lot of emerging ideas when it comes to AI and how we can replicate some of that trust and safety, but we don't necessarily see it in practice across the board yet. And I think that's a real concern.
Mm-hmm. So are there some specific potential limitations or pitfalls that organizations should be aware when implementing AI, maybe ethics considerations? I know we had a lot of discussion about it with other guys on the interview. And how can we mitigate this risk?
Yeah, I think the phrase I was using earlier on pattern matching is part of the problem. Not all of our existing patterns are ones that we actually want to be matching against and replicating. And I think that's a really interesting opportunity, but also a challenge. If we think about loan underwriting, for example, loan underwriting has been not necessarily a pattern we want to continue on. Some of the data points we're looking at that can be hugely biased based on where, let's say, in the world you've grown up and the types of experiences you've had. Yet we're used to looking at a certain sort of data points there to make decisions. And if AI is to, say, copy that, we don't even understand maybe some of the biased decisions it's making in the same way we've been able to develop an understanding of how we can do this better. So I think the concern is pattern matching and not questioning if we're happy to match those patterns.
Mm-hmm. So I would like to ask you a personal point of view. In your experience, what are some common misconceptions or blind spots that individuals or organizations have when it comes to AI and risk management?
Oh, it's such an early time that I'm sure we're also going to look back on this time and laugh at all of ourselves for some of the things and ways we've been wrong. But I think one of the things that I've noticed is it seems to be upper management that is being looked at to develop out an AI plan. And I actually think it's maybe some of the operators who are involved in day-to-day processes who might actually have the best understanding of how to incorporate new technology, places where they're spending a lot of time and making repetitive decisions. And they might actually be best equipped to think about how to transform an organization. But I think we're so often seeing this be the role of upper management to develop out this AI plan in a vacuum, maybe not as aware of what some of the opportunities actually are.
Mm-hmm. Let's dig a little bit to discuss a little bit about RegTech and partnerships for fintech companies. So how can the smaller fintech companies and startups leverage this AI for risk management without extensive resources? Are there any accessible AI solution available for them, like such as tools or out of box or something like this?
we spend a lot of time thinking about partnerships in general and how to do vendor management. That is such a key component of risk management, is understanding your vendor process and onboarding and monitoring. And I think there are a lot of really interesting options out there that maybe are still relatively early in their product lifecycle. But by starting to use them when they're early, it's possible to help shape the development of those products as well. And I think it comes back to finding an area where you can incorporate that is not a very critical process. In the same way you think about onboarding other vendors, how can you bring something on to test it, to understand how it's going to work? Maybe it's not using live data and you get to understand what it's like to interact with one of these products. Does it actually work in the way it's advertised? And go through a bit of vendor due diligence before you kind of let something loose internally.
Mm-hmm. So what are the key factors that, for example, fintechs, because we have a lot of fintech, small fintech companies like yourself, should consider when evaluating and selecting solutions for regulatory technology for their specific needs?
So I think there's a heavy counterbalance, which is not everything has to be done using the latest technology. And we've built quite a lot of our platform using very standard technology. AI is a very, very small percentage of what we're doing. A lot of what we do, we want to be able to understand how things were calculated in the way they were, to be able to walk through all of those calculation steps. And so having defined rules is still sometimes a great way to go about things. So I think as a small startup, it's important to understand where you're putting your time and effort. Are you actually going to get the return that you're wanting by trying out some new technology? My experience as software engineering, I use things like Copilot and software engineering tools. And I think that's a really good example of, they provide suggestions. They're not making decisions for us. They help us as a company. And it's not necessarily in the product itself and customer facing. So there's so many different ways in which modern technology can help a company that isn't just necessarily, say, a chatbot.
Mm-hmm. All right. So you are a startup founder and also CTO, which is kind of very unusual as a lady, young lady in our technical landscape. So what is your kind of unique advantage in this world of mostly male-dominated people?
It's such an interesting one. And I think my answer to that changes every year too as I gather new experiences. But I think it's been the level of exposure and involvement I've had to non-engineering teams throughout my career, the friends that I might make in a lunchroom or the coffee area maybe aren't other engineers. And so I've gotten really exposed to and kind of engaged with other corporate teams in a way that I might not have if I had the same sort of, let's say, community within all of the engineering orgs that I've been a part of. And I've really enjoyed that in my career. I think I lean a little bit more product and operations as a CTO. I'm really understanding our product roadmap, arguably more so than maybe some other CTOs who are maybe more focused on engineering management or other areas within kind of that CTO map. And I think that's largely due to the experiences I've been afforded by making different friends throughout my career.
Mm-hmm. So maybe let's discuss more for individuals interested in pursuing a career in AI and technology and RegTech. What advice would you give them, and what skills and knowledge should they focus on developing?
There's such a gap sometimes between academics and professional world that it's really important to have an understanding of how things work in theory, but to understand what some of the questions that are being asked in practice is equally as important. What are the concerns of organizations? What are the ways in which we think about building guardrails? How do we think about how this works in practice? So I think my advice would be take a role at a company that seems like it's doing something really interesting in the real world and see how they're thinking about it. Work with smart people and bring your own perspective, but listen a lot.
Mm-hmm. So could you maybe in more sentences introduce us to your company, what you guys are specifically doing, and why a large organization should involve your solutions instead of just doing what they're doing now, or maybe buying a more established brand?
Certainly. We automate the account monitoring and offboarding process for banks and financial institutions. Historically, a lot of this process has been extremely manual, report driven, a lot of time in Excel. And Excel is a great tool, but it's extremely error prone if you're handling everything on your own. And we've seen some examples of errors from sorting in ways that are unexpected. So we've been building out tools that are around this life cycle in very bespoke ways, specifically around dormancy and the achievement process, being able to incorporate state by state rules where we're strictly US focused, since a lot of what we've been focused on at the moment is based on US laws, which vary also by state. So there's a huge level of complexity in the fintech space where fintechs are operating in untraditional and non-historic ways where they have customers in all 50 states. Some time ago, banks had local customers where you can come to a bank branch and see in person. So we've been seeing a whole proliferation of data and how people interact with their financial institutions and being able to use that in more efficient ways for the account monitoring process.
All right, fantastic. So looking to the future, what trends or developments do you anticipate in this in your world of interception of AI technology and fintech?
I think we'll develop out a shared understanding on how to onboard and monitor products that use emerging technology. I think right now each institution is trying out new processes and understanding what works, but there isn't really the shared agreement on things that institutions should be doing when they onboard new technology like AI, and making sure that that decision making is done in both a fair manner but also a safe manner. So I know I'm particularly excited to have this industry-wide understanding of how we can evaluate AI technology in practice.
Mm-hmm. All right. So if we summarize our interview, if someone who is listening to this interview would like to walk away with one or two major takeaways, what would that be?
I think maybe start small. Start trying something new. Doesn't mean that you have to replace your most core critical process. Just understand and start to build your organization's understanding of how new technology can affect your workflow. And that I think it's not just for upper management. I think everyone at an organization gets a very different perspective of how processes operate and might be able to highlight unique opportunities for technology to play a role.
All right. Thank you very much. These were all my questions. Perhaps if I forgot something to ask you that you would like to, that our audience will benefit, and please go ahead.
That was such a great set. That was a really fun conversation.
All right. And thank you very much, Stephanie, for coming to our interview. And I hope we will be partners with your company. So maybe next, in a few months, we'll do another interview, because it's always interesting to speak on specific topics you have, because you have such a unique expertise of bringing a startup from zero to something, from 0 to 1, as they say.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a fun chance to chat about what we're doing and what's happening in the industry with people of very different perspective.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.